Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how to simplify our collection of data in our SIR model by going from having multiple time series down to having one time frame. So let's just do a quick recap of how this worked before. So we had a system object where in this system object, you have a state called init, and you put that and the update function into your run simulation. We created 3 different time series objects, and we initialized that information by writing down here's what the initial state was, bringing that into our local variables. We then initialized the values of the first times for S, I, and R. And then we ran our for loop to actually run the simulation, incorporating our update function, which was able to go from time t to time t plus 1. We got a new value for the state variable, and we used that state variable to plug in these new values of S, I, and R. And once we ran through this for loop and had collected all our data, we returned all 3 objects in one return statement. So our goal now is to take this, and instead of creating 3 different time series, we create one data structure that has in it all of the data. Okay, so the first thing we do is we create, instead of 3 time series objects, we create a time frame object. Remember, series is a one-dimensional type of data, whereas a frame is a two-dimensional type of data. One thing that we do here is we specify that the columns in this time frame, in this array of data, this two-dimensional array of data, have the same labels as our init had. So in this example, right now, we've been using S, I, and R as our variables in our init state. But if we decided to create a completely different scenario, maybe with different states, this code here for the time frame would still work. That's one benefit of using this time frame, because on the left-hand side, this S, I, and R, they would not be able to update manually about what the init is. If you added in another state, for example, deaths, where you had a D here, well, D would be another time series. You'd have to go in and modify the multiple time series code. Whereas in this time frame, we don't have to modify that. All right, so just like on the left-hand side, this S, I, and R created the empty containers for the data. Then on the right side, the time frame object creates, this is just an empty array. So we have to start populating it. So before, what we did to populate our data was we created a local variable called state, and we put whatever this system object was, whatever this init object was, we define it to be state, and then we put in our first element of S, our first element of I, and our first element of R, we define those to be the values in state. Now what we're doing is we're looking at the first row of our time frame. And remember, to access a row in a time frame, you have to use .loc, so location. So frame.loc of 0 is equal to system.init. So the time frame already knows, this empty time frame already knows what the columns of init are. You told it. And because we know that the columns here of the time frame match up with the columns of system.init, then frame.loc of 0 knows where to put this data. The columns of the frame are determined by S, I, and R And because that data is in system.init, it's easy to put that into that first row. All right, next up, our for loop. Now our for loop looks pretty similar because what do we need to do? We need to run this for loop for t in range. Same thing here, we're running this for loop for t in range. Previously, we defined a state object as what we get from running our update function. And then we put that information into S, I, and R. We've done this now in one step instead of two. It is on 2 lines, but that's because I ran out of space. You can put this in 1 line on the computer. We are running our update function on T, our current state, and our system object. And when we run that update function, we take that information, we put it right back in to the time frame. So the row T goes into the update function. The update function tells us what the values are for S, I, and R in time t plus 1. And then that comes back out and it gets put into the next row of our time frame. All right, last is instead, now all this information, instead of being in an S, an I, and an R, is now in one frame object with multiple columns, S, I, and R. And we can now just pass out that one object instead of 2 objects. So we'll do that and we will return frame. And now this code is much shorter, but it applies to many more situations, which is always a plus. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about extracting information out of the time frame. Let's do that in the next video. All right, see you soon.